Hey everyone, this is from round 9 of the Isle of Man tournament. And this game features GM Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces against old school veteran from England, GM Michael Adams with the black pieces. Now, this is a rough game for me because both of these players are my favorite players. I like their styles. They play to me like the play is very similar, super solid, and I was thinking the game would end in a draw, but it was a good game, and this is just my quick analysis, rough overview of what I just saw. All right, so the game starts out classical formation with the Ruy Lopez. There's the offer for the Berlin, and D3, which is all the rage nowadays, is played, avoiding the Berlin. Bishop C5, and now the position will begin to take on the like of Joko piano positions in a little while. C3 is played. The attempt to try to win a pawn after D takes C6. Excuse me, bishop takes C6, D takes C6, knight takes E5 ends in a quick loss and resignation after Queen D4 with the double attack on the knight on E5 and the pawn on F2. So C3 is played first. Black just simply castles. And now F bishop takes C6 and B takes C6. Knight takes E5. D5 is an interesting line where black tries to play on his lead in development here. So for instance, after D4 challenging the bishop, it's a really nice move here. Knight takes E4, and after the bishop is captured, then just simply Queen E8 or Rook E8, challenging the knight and threatening a discovery attack on his king. So you can't do two moves at once in chess. So for example, trying to save the piece ends in immediate disaster after knight takes C3, discover check. The knight hitting the queen and the rook hitting the king. So there's some nuances here, and that's why you don't see this pawn snatched off the board right away. So back to the game after 5 castles by black. Caruana castled also. Rook E1, now protecting the pawn. Bishop G5, introducing pin here. H6. Adams wants Caruana to declare his intentions with the bishop. Bishop H4. So his intentions are to maintain the pin, which he does. A6, asking the same question of the other bishop, but at the same time, in some cases, providing a place for the bishop to go in case it gets attacked on the C5 square. So, bishop C4, and now the position takes on a Giuoco piano type feel to it. Real quick, what is the Giuoco piano? E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, bishop C4, bishop C5, and this is pretty much the setup. Instead of the bishop going here on move 3, challenging the knight and indirectly attacking the e-pawn. The bishop goes here, and this is how many games of chess began in the 1800s. Go back to the game. And this is why I said the game takes on a Gioco piano type feel, because we can see a similar position and similar ideas, of course. Bishop c4, d6. So the position looks very normal. Nothing much is going on. Knight bd2. And you see Adam's idea with a6 earlier. It's having a safe place for the bishop so that the bishop can't be harassed, say after knight b3. There's a4, and Caruana is an excellent positional player. He reminds me of Karpov, and so does Adams. So it's interesting to see these players with similar styles playing each other. So a4, expanding on the queen side, and later wanting to play a6, creating ever so slight advantage in space over here and trying to provoke weakness on the queen side. Bishop e6, and there it is, a5. And there's some slight possibilities here for white, nothing too serious, but just keep in mind certain ideas like queen b3 with the attack on this b7 pawn, because it's these small advantages that eventually build up. Adams trades pieces. Knight takes c4. Again, nothing remarkable in the position. And we just see that white just has a slight advantage in space. Also, with the dual pressure on e5 from the knights, it's hard for black to achieve his desired advance of d5. Also note the influence of this bishop pinning this knight to the queen and also making it difficult to achieve d5. Another feature in the position is now, after the absence of the light square bishops, which is an important strategical decision, the f5 square is now vulnerable, and these knights would love to go there. So keep an eye on that square, and even the d5 square, but definitely the f5 square. Rook e6. What's the idea of rook e6? Well, one of them is to get this queen out of the pin and without paying the price of having his kingside pawns shattered. So the rook comes and does the duty that would normally be done by this bishop, so if it was over here in Gioco piano lines. And that's one of the differences too. In Gioco piano, often some lines, this bishop will go back to e7. This bishop will go back to e7 in order to break the pin. However, the bishop had developed to c5 and went back to a7. So now Adams uses the rook to break the pin. So knight e3 is played, and remember the idea of the knight going to f5. And notice now there's no bishop there to guard the f5 square, and so if Michael Adams is to guard that square, he has to either play g6 or play a move like knight d7 and trade off the knight once it reaches that square. Again, we give white a slight advantage here. Bishop takes e3, another critical decision by Adams. The reason why he did it, again, is due to the vulnerability of the light square, f5. He doesn't want to have to deal with that knight coming there, and he doesn't want to further weaken this king side with a move like g6. So he parts with the bishop here. The price that Caruana has to pay is he has double pawns on the e file now. But central double pawns are interesting because they cover a lot of squares. As you see, the pawn on e3 and the pawn on e4 uh, keep black out basically. Uh, with that pawn on e3, black has no chance of getting his knight to f4, for instance, say after the queen moves somewhere. And also, you have a ready made open f file for white to try to exploit. Another thing is also the f5 square is still vulnerable, and white still has another knight to that he can try to put on there. So black didn't solve all of his problems by eliminating that one knight. Furthermore, sometimes even though the pawns are doubled now, later on, after say moves like queen c2 guarding the e pawn and then the later d4, sometimes the pawns get exchanged and white still has his dual pawn center. So all of black's problems are not solved even though he's playing very well. d5. So now you see manifest the other idea of eliminating the knight that was here, because this knight not only covered f5, which I spoke about in abundance, I should have mentioned that it also covers d5. So this is part of Adam's strategy. He plays d5, which is the desired advance in e-pawn openings in general, and a very important advance. So here he gets his advance in, and of course he's threatening to take once again. But again, notice the pressure here of this knight being pinned. Caruana makes an excellent move here. Plays d4, making his claim in the center. And of course, he can make that move because he has this pawn on e3. So for instance, if e takes d4, then say knight takes d4, knight takes d4, and you could slip in a move like e takes d5. This guy's pinned, so queen takes d5, bishop takes f6 first, because this guy can't really go anywhere, or this guy can't really go anywhere rather. G takes f6, and then go into a nice ending. That's what I would do. And black is on the respirator right now in this position. It's a tough position to try to hold on to. So back to the game. After e takes d4, again, e takes d4 was played. Caruana eliminates the bishop. He gives up his final bishop. Bishop takes f6. Rook takes f6. That was the purpose, to keep his pawn structure intact. When he played rook e6, that was his main idea. e5. Rook e6. Pressuring the pawn center. And now e takes d4. And this is excellent play from Caruana. And Adams, they're going back and forth. It's basically Adams is playing the best moves you can possibly play in the position. So now, with the knight and rook focused here, plays f6 because black wants to tear down that pawn center, which is an advantage right now. So rook e1 and queen d7. Time to bring the last guy into the game here. Excuse me. If f takes e5, which is possible, then d takes e5. Queen d7 and queen b3, attacking his pawn. And then probably something like rook e8 might not be feasible after queen takes b7. I'm sorry, rook a d8 is not feasible after that move. So after queen d7, queen b3, this move is bad because of this. What I meant to say is rook e8, going back, and then if queen takes b7, that will be a mistake because of this trapping the queen. Okay, so back to the game. So f6 was played, queen d7, queen b3 with the idea just mentioned. Pawn is a pawn is a pawn. Now this is a critical moment. Rook b8 could be played, but Adams plays in the center, which I think is very important. So f takes e5, d takes e5, saddling white with the isolated pawn. And now the battle revolves around, is the isolated pawn going to be strong for white, or is it going to be weak for white? If black can blockade that isolated pawn and round it up and tie up white's pieces, then black will have an advantage. But if he cannot restrain this pawn, and if white is still able to do what he wants with his pieces and move his pieces to good squares and control the open lines around the isolated pawn, then black is in for a long day at the office. So let's continue. Rook f8. So now Adams is already looking for counter attacking possibilities. He has his rook on his third rank, which would be the sixth rank, right? Looking from the white side. And so there's all these ideas of rook to g6, rook takes f3, and queen coming over. Those are the main ideas, aggressive ideas. So he's not really uh, thinking about this b pawn, although this is possible. But a move like this, to me, kind of has the seeds of disaster, like later on down the road. Yeah, right now you might be okay, but that's just a passive move, and rooks don't really do well being passive. So I appreciate Michael Adams' move here, rook f8. I think it's the right idea in this position. Caruana's alert. After all, the guy is 2800, so he sees the same thing Michael Adams sees right here, and plays rook e3. There it is, rook g6. Like even a blind man can see these ideas of the king side attack brewing from white. And black, of course, would love to distract white in protecting himself on the king side and being concerned about the attack, and then just snatch up this pawn. Right now, notice these features in the position. d5 pawn is pinned, and this pawn is still under attack. So the queen is in an excellent place. Also notice from the black side is that there's pressure on this pawn. In other words, this rook can't just get up and go right now because the knight is attacking on a5. So there's a unique balance here in the position. I still like white here. White has a little bit more pressure than black in a position, and I don't like the fact that this pawn is not blockaded. I agree with Nimzovich when it comes to blockaded pawns. Like when it comes to isolating past pawns, like you have to stop them immediately, because what happens when you don't blockade past pawns and stuff, what happens is you think they can't move, and then they wind up becoming sacrifices, and you know, there's a pawn sack, and next thing you know, the position is busted wide open, and it's too late by then. But of course, these guys are very experienced, and they know when to break, these rules and concepts. Let's go on. And that's why, of course, for black, one of the moves I'm thinking is a move like knight to perhaps not in this position, but as far as idea wise. But maybe it does work in this position, although it's white's move right now. But a move like knight e8 and knight to e6, followed by c6, right? That's a sound idea. The pawn gets blockaded by the knight. The knight is the best blockading piece. And then c6 follows up and protects the pawn on d5. The only downside of c6 is that it weakens the b6 square slightly. But sometimes you have to give some to get some. So these are the ideas that we're dealing with right now. King h1, a good move, anticipating the coming storm. And just like in real life, and I want to take this time too to think about all the families in the hurricane down there in Florida and stuff in that region and suffering. When we're getting ready for a storm, and we know a storm's coming, the weather forecasters tell us to prepare and get ready. And analogy in chess is the same. It's based on the same principles. Caruana knows that an attack is coming from Michael Adams, so he gets ready. He prepares. He plays rook e3. He tucks his king away. King h1. Why does he put the king on h1? Well, you don't want the queen to end up here and where the queen cannot be captured. You see, there's preparation is one of the major keys to success. Okay, so king h1. Another interesting move also is g3. But I like king h1, keeping these pawns intact, not moving them. Because when you move them, then you create weak squares. You got to be very careful. Notice the weak squares, light squares around Adam's king. Oh, and there it is, knight d8. Look at that. Great minds think alike. Just kidding. But Adams makes a great move, and again, he knows all the principles. He's gonna play c6, and when I was watching the game, I just knew that I felt Adams was either actually gonna win this game or it was just gonna end in the draw. I mean, Caruana is very difficult to beat, especially when he has the white pieces. But I just felt he had enough going on in the position that he shouldn't lose. Rook d1. Why rook d1? Come on, guys. You know why. Double attack. And furthermore, you have the attack on the d5 pawn, and you have the further X-ray going past that to the queen on d7. So after c6 is played, now the queen is still kind of in the shady predicament, being lined up with the rook on d1. So c4 is played, just piling up. Sorry about that beeping noise. Fire alarm had went off, but there was no fire. And right now in this position, Michael Adams' fire alarm should be going off because we see this pressure being put on this pawn right here. Now, this is the critical position because even though Adams is putting all this pressure on the pawn, this pawn is not fixed and therefore has the option to move, even though it looks like it can't move. And this is one of the other reasons why Nimzovich speaks about blockade. See, when you have a piece in front of the pawn, let me use the let me get rid of the graphics here. When you have a piece in front of the pawn, let's say just for argument's sake, it was like that, then black would have no choice but to capture or capture that pawn on c4, but he surely would not be able to push it forward. And in an analogous position, if black has a knight here, that pawn is not going anywhere unless that knight is removed. And once it's fixed, then you can come up with a strategy and subsequent tactics to try to win the pawn. Now watch what happens. So Caruana is attacking the pawn. Looks great with two pieces and one pawn. So 3 units altogether. Adams finds an excellent move here. He just pushes. What? How can he do that? D4. Right, you had the rook here, the knight here. You figuring what? Well, one of the problems here is look where the king is. Remember the king moved over to H1? So here's the downside, because now he has back rank problems. Here's the back rank for the new beginners. These two ranks, all the way in the top and all the way at the bottom, constitute each player's back rank. Because the chessboard is divided up into ranks and files. So these are all ranks. Right? I'm just ODing on the graphics right now. Right? These are all ranks. So you know what I'm talking about. And these would be files. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and so on. These are all files. Okay? Ranks and files. Alright. So C4 and D4. So D4 is played. And of course, the rook cannot be captured. But the idea is that the back rank of white is a little weak. So he has to play queen c2. Let's look real quick. So if rook takes d4, then a quick handshake would have been produced after queen takes d4. Because knight takes d4 and then the rook would have came down. Checkmate. There's no protection. That's what you call a weak back rank. Same thing would have happened if knight takes d4. Immediate handshake after queen takes d4, rook takes d4, and mate again. So that's what allowed the tactic d4. Now I'm not saying Caruana didn't see it, because he probably saw that. That's how profound these guys are. He probably saw that and said, after that I'm going to play queen c2, which attacks this rook. So you're seeing some top flight chess here. Now during the game, at this point, I said, well, why can't my first instinct was queen g4, but queen g4 doesn't do anything. You just drop the pawn. Why? Because the queen is guarding. So this is what Lasker used to talk about, Emanuel Lasker. Emanuel Lasker used to say, when you have to make some kind of defensive move, if you can, don't make an all defensive move. What do I mean by like all defensive move? Try to make a move that has the elements of defense. In other words, defend what they're supposed to be defended. But at the same time, try to, if you can get an attacking move or threat involved, then you can kind of kill two birds with one stone. Like for instance, a straight defensive move would be like try to make a bad move here. Straight defensive move would be a move like, okay, let's just say for argument's sake this rook was attacked, even though it's not, because the queen is vulnerable. A straight defensive move would just be rook back here, rook e1. Basically you're defending the piece, but it does nothing else. Lasker always would try to not only make the defensive move, but incorporate something, a bit of poison into the move. And Caruana does that here. He has the position to do it. He plays queen c2, which, right, threatens the rook, but then incorporates some defense here on the second rank. So the move rooks. The rook moves to g4, assisting in the development. Excuse me, assisting in the protection of this pawn here. Now, if Caruana didn't make this move, I say I don't know. Let's make another like dubious type of move. Say he went here, then Black can just continue unabated with his plan and play knight e6, which protects the pawn and blockade. See how you're getting that 2 for 1? It's kind of when you go into like the grocery store and you looking for a box of donuts and you get the donuts that say 2 for 1. You know, 2 boxes for $3 or something like that. That's what you're trying to do in chess. You're trying to get 2 for 1, 3 for 1. You're trying to get all you can get out of that one move. So Queen C2 was played and Rook G4. So notice that because of the threat to the Rook here, Knight E6 has to be put on the back burner. Can't do it right now. Had to protect the Rook and the pawn. Having done that, Adams is geared up again to do the same thing. Oops, can't do it. Another threat. We got to deal with it. So he has to stay. He has to stay on the fourth rank. Keep this protected. And now you have B4 played. And I think B4, the idea behind B4 is, or one of the ideas is to stop or prevent C5 from fortifying this pawn here. And of course, I think Adams probably saw it. So again, you know, after a move like Rook E1, then just C5, and this is rough. This is rough for White. And Black would be better because Black has not only the king side aspirations attacking, he also has good endgame chances with his passer. This, my friends, is why Caruana played B4. He has to stop that. Leave this pawn isolated. Even though it's not technically an isolated pawn, in practice it is an isolated pawn because there's no way that Black can back this pawn up with another pawn. That was the purpose of B4. Now what? Well, Adams finds a combination here and goes through with his plan. He plays Rook takes F3, Rook takes F3, Rook takes F3, and now he picks up a bunch of pawns, but he's down the exchange. So he has a queen and rook, queen and knight versus queen and rook. King G1, Queen G3 check, Queen G2, Queen takes E5. So now you do the pawn count. What does he have for the exchange? He has 2 pawns. He's up 2 pawns. He has 1, 2, 3, 4 on the queen side, and he has this 2-1 on the king side. Now, I would say in theory it's probably a draw in theory, but we're talking about human chess. Maybe if you put 2 computer engines together, it's probably a draw. But in practicality, this is difficult. Let's see what happened here. So F4. Now, did Caruana have to give up that pawn? Probably not. But it's like he's playing for practical chances here. At this point, Adams was down on time. Adams had about a minute. He plays F4. So maybe instead of F4, maybe just a simple move. I don't know, maybe King F1. Interesting. In other words, he didn't have to give up this pawn. It's hard to see what he should have did, but he didn't have to give up the pawn. But it's like a practical move. He gets to open up lines, and his opponent is in a little bit of time pressure. I think Adams. This is move 34, and Adams had about a minute. Caruana had about 11 minutes. So queen takes f4. So now he has 3 pawns for the piece. Excuse me, for the exchange. Another feature of the position is notice the knight is still back here. The knight still hasn't made it to e6. So white has done a great job in giving black something to deal with move after move so that he cannot really complete his own plans. And meanwhile, black has done a great job defending, fighting for the initiative. So rook e1, real primitive threat. Check and pick this guy up. And the additional open line helps the rook. Rooks need open files. Protects. Everything's protected. Queen to g4. So here's like some attacking moves going on. Caruana probably would like to trade the queens off if he can. Say if this knight decides to move, trade the queens off. And also, he keeps the knight from getting to e6, which is it's funny because it's like this poor knight can never gets to e6. So knight f7. Check. And this is rough. This is rough. I think it's hard to say what this is rough because once this rook gets to the back rank, this is where I think things start to go downhill for Adams. Because again, rooks need open files and ranks. Once this rook gets to the back rank, how are you gonna protect all of this? Yes, you're up 3 pawns, but how are you gonna protect everything? And the position also from black's perspective is not suitable for knights. For knights to really thrive, they need outposts. What's an outpost? This is an outpost, for example, e3 and c3 are outposts in this position. This would also be an outpost. This would not be an outpost because the white pawn is there guarding these squares. The definition of an outpost is a station where a piece can stay without being attacked by pawns or really in any immediate danger of getting traded off. This would be a suitable outpost. But only in a fantasy world would white be able to, would black be able to really make this happen. Meanwhile, it's very realistic that this rook can just eat up these pawns over here on the queen side. Let's see what happens. So rook e8, the king is driven to the corner. Rook e6. Again, pressure, attacking the queen. The queen gets driven away. Check, and perhaps even winning the knight and checkmate in some circumstances. So the knight is really on a bad square. It's queen g5. Adams really has no choice but to go into a bad ending. Knight takes g5. Again, he's up 3 pawns, but the rooks are like hungry hippo on the 7th rank. c5, just trying to create some distraction. And that move really is like a desperate move. I don't know if it was like a time trouble move because this is move 40. He plays c5 and Caruana just plays b5. He could have simply just took the pawn also. Basically, he can win in several different ways at this point. So c5. Okay, so b5 is played. A takes b5. A takes b5. Now you got 2 to 1, And so one of these pawns is going to be a candidate, which is that A pawn. We'll talk about candidates one of these days. We're just doing that. Maybe when I make some videos just based on like endings and stuff. C takes B5, C4. So Adams makes a run for it. He figures he has these two pawns, and he's gonna try to queen. But the king is a piece too. And Steinitz used to say the king is a fighting piece in the ending. So the king doesn't have to worry about being checkmated. So now the king can go fight against these two pawns. C3, and only if black could get him connected on a six rank together, maybe he would have some chance. But Caruana, the grandmaster, puts a stop to all of that. Let's say, for example, make a real dubious move and play King G1 just so you can see. Of course, C2 would be played, but this would also win too. And then say after that, there's no stopping it once those pawns get together on the back rank like that. So for instance, D2, rook takes C2, and you got a queen. Just to show you how close Adams was to having a different outcome here. But instead, let's go back to reality. King E2 was played, and these pawns don't get connected together on the 6th rank. Knight H3, one in the play knight F4, and perhaps still fulfill a dream. Right? It's just like the lotto. It's a dream. Play knight F4 and then D3. But guess what? Caruana stops that from happening by covering these squares. Playing against the knight. Remember, this knight is crippled. No outposts. Actually there are some, but there's no way for the knight to get there. So we can basically say there are no outposts. So after rook F7, black resign. So I hope you enjoyed that game. That was a fantastic game by both players. Caruana for just playing so precisely, and for Adams making it exciting. I'm sure he got into some type of time trouble. That's bold sacrifice, giving up the exchange, but in the end, it just was not enough. So, like and subscribe, and leave all the comments below. And if you have any questions, I will answer all the questions. Okay, see you on the next video.